Up until this point, it's been so easy to submit starting lineups with wide receivers. Well, now we have a million teams on bye. Now we have a million injuries. And yeah, it's actually going to be a little bit difficult. You'll see once we get to like the low end wide receiver ones, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, is Michael Pittman really a wide receiver one? Talk about him just 1 second. Starting off tier 1, we have Tyreek, we have Kupp, and we have AJ Brown. The main thing I want to talk about is going to be this Philadelphia Eagles Miami Dolphins game. I mean, last Sunday, I asked you on the live stream who you thought the Super Bowl favorites should be and who you had going to the big game. And overwhelmingly, we had a lot of people coming out and saying Miami, Philadelphia. This could be a Super Bowl preview. I want to start as many guys in this game as possible because I really do want to watch it. It's the Sunday night game. And more importantly, the over-under of this game's 52 points. Supposed to be the highest scoring game of the week, and it's not even close. I mean, the next best game is the Chargers-Chiefs, which of course we will talk about. Now, going over to our next tier, we will talk about Stefon Diggs. Stefon Diggs, super consistent option. I mean, he's the number 4 wide receiver this season from a points per game perspective. Not really a lot to discuss. Really high floor, really high ceiling. Now, I'm recording this video right at the beginning of the Chargers and Cowboys game, so I don't really know how Keenan Allen's going to do. I would imagine Keenan Allen's going to do well. Obviously, it's a tougher matchup going up against Dallas, but should be a really nice game going up against the Chiefs. The over-under on this game will be 50 points, a lot of points scored. And obviously with Keenan Allen, a wide receiver with a considerable amount of target volume with no Mike Williams. Now, Amon-Ra St. Brown will be our next wide receiver at 6. With St. Brown, it helps him that Jameson Williams is in this offense. 9 times out of 10, if you hear someone go, oh, this wide receiver coming back actually helps because he takes attention away. They can't double team our guy anymore. 9 times out of 10, that's BS. 9 times out of 10, you just want him to be the only guy in there. But it actually makes sense with Jameson Williams because Jameson Williams is that wide receiver that is a field stretching option. He's going to be the deep threat while Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, these will be the guys that are seeing targets underneath. So with that being said, St. Brown, you see the insane amount of target volume this past week. What is crazy is you would assume that, at least I would assume the Detroit Lions are favored in this game heavily, but right now they're 3-point dogs, which is interesting. Now, Davante Adams will be our next wide receiver. With Adams, you may not have Jimmy Garoppolo in this game, and if Jimmy G does not play, then at that point, okay, Jacobe Myers probably not good to go, but Adams, nothing changes. Someone that's going to get flooded with target volume regardless who the quarterback is. I understand he hasn't been great. So if you look at our rest of season rankings with his recent struggles, we are going to be moving him down more so as a low-end wide receiver 1. But this week with a million buys, we have to throw him here. Now going over to Brandon Aiyuk at 8. I am ranking him under the assumption you have no Deebo Samuel. As of today, Deebo Samuel is day-to-day with a shoulder injury. Now, if Deebo were to play, then at that point, Brandon Aiyuk would fall down. Deebo Samuel would move up these rankings. It's a good matchup against Minnesota. I expect this to be a bounce back game for Brock Purdy. The primary thing that we are going to be waiting for will be Deebo news. And I'm going to update y'all with flex rankings later in the week. So just make sure you are subscribed to the channel. And of course, if you haven't already, hit that like button. And if you want to check out any of these pick'ems over on Underdog, my favorite is our next guy, Chris Olave, more than 61.5 receiving yards. You can find that link in the description, in the comment section. Promo code FLOCK, you're going to get a 100% deposit match, plus our rest of season fantasy football rankings, a free special pick'em on Thursday night. It's going to be like Trevor Lawrence, more than less than half a total yard. If Lawrence doesn't play, they'll swap it to Derek Carr. But yeah, make sure you take advantage. And we actually got y'all hooked up with another free pick'em coming in week 8 because y'all like the Herbert one so much. Now, going over to our next guy with Olave. Like I said, I like him more than 61.5 receiving yards. Matchup against Jacksonville is kind of whatever. I mean, Michael Pittman just did great, but at the same time, you had Minshew throwing 3 interceptions. It was just all garbage time, right? But Olave, this is a wide receiver seeing double-digit targets this past week. We go back through the first 3 weeks when Derek Carr was healthy. Every single week, Chris Olave had double-digit targets. This is someone that was a clear buy low candidate. I hope you bought him low. And I'm very excited about him going forward. A little bit worried about the game environment, though, because the over-under is only 39 points on this game. Should be a lower scoring contest. Now, our next guy will be Jaylen Waddle. And honestly, you know what? A 39-point game total versus a 52-point game total. I'll probably have to move Jaylen Waddle ahead of Olave here. But nonetheless, going up against Philly, it's a tough matchup on paper. A.J. Brown did just fine. And you may have this as a Miami Dolphins offense that is actually having to throw the ball instead of run it because it is a tougher matchup. Now, we will have Puka at 11. And y'all know I spent the entire beginning of the season saying, sell Puka, sell Puka, sell Puka. He's going to be a low-end wide receiver 2 when Cooper comes back. Give me Olave, give me Waddle. I'd still rather have those guys, but I was wrong. I want to say that Puka is still going to be that high-end wide receiver 2, even with Cooper Kupp in this offense, ladies and gentlemen. Last week was very disappointing, but ultimately he was like 1 foot away from actually having another receiving touchdown. He's going to be fine. And now dropping down to our next tier, we'll go DK Metcalf. Pretty good matchup against Arizona. And I know we keep calling DK Metcalf a sell high and people keep getting mad. Well, good news for the people getting mad. DK Metcalf is actually that close to being a top 24 wide receiver from a points per game perspective for the first time since 2020. Right now, he is at wide receiver 23 from a points per game perspective. It should be a really good matchup going up against Arizona. Now, Michael Pittman will be our next guy. I would love to have Pittman ahead of DK Metcalf. He'll be ahead of him in our rest of season rankings. But with that being said, I mean, he's going up against the Cleveland Browns. Horrendous matchup, a matchup that we for sure want to be avoiding if we can. And the Devonta Smith at 13. With Smith, I want as many players in this game environment as possible. Yes, he was extremely disappointing. I understand that. But he did have 11 targets at the same time. So if you were getting, I'm sorry, maybe even 12. I don't know. If you're getting double-digit targets from Devonta Smith and one of the best offenses in the NFL and one of the highest scoring games in the NFL, sign me up. Now, our next guy will be Mike Evans. With Evans going up against the Atlanta Falcons, it's kind of a whatever matchup, right? I mean, the main thing is you're just trying to see if Baker Mayfield will have that bounce back game. If Baker bounces back, the matchup against Atlanta does not matter. Now, it should be a low scoring game overall. I mean, the over-under of this game is only 38.5 points. We know Atlanta will try to run the ball and slow the pace of play down. Jordan Addison will be our next wide receiver at 15. With Addison, he has an every down role with no Justin Jefferson. He looks great. My one concern is you're going up against the 49ers. Amari got there this past week against the 49ers, but ultimately this is a 49ers defense that is most likely going to come out here and just crush Minnesota with no Justin Jefferson. So I think that we should be a little bit worried about this. I mean, the Vikings are 7-point favorites. Now, going over to our next guy, we will have DJ Moore. And with DJ Moore, he was a sell-high player for us last week alongside Justin Fields. Of course, I had no idea that Fields was going to get hurt. But I will say, to be fair to DJ Moore, I don't think the downgraded quarterback is going to hurt DJ Moore too much. It's going to be similar to the Anthony Richardson to Gardner Minshew situation, and that it may hurt the overall offense. But when we remove the quarterback that's going to be stealing a lot of that production from himself on the ground, and maybe even if the offense is hurt, the wide receivers see a comparable amount of volume. I don't know. I don't think Justin Fields is a great in real life NFL quarterback anyway. I mean, Fields was horrendous before he got injured this past game. The main thing I'm concerned about is the over-under of this game is 37.5 points. Right now, it projects to be the lowest scoring game of the week. Hollywood Brown will be our next wide receiver at 17. With Hollywood, you have consistent target volume, very similar to DJ Moore. You also have, very bad quarterback play here. The difference is if you're going to be looking at this over-under, you actually have it at 45.5 points. So Hollywood may be playing in a much better game environment. I mean, keep in mind, the spread on this game is 8 points as well. So the applied team total for Arizona is still incredibly low. Now, Christian Watson will be our next guy at 18. Going up against the Denver Broncos, obviously we know that we want to be starting Aaron Jones. I think Christian Watson could be a sneaky start, a sneaky buy low candidate as well. Only the wide receiver 45 from a points per game perspective, but you have to keep in mind his first week back. Obviously, this is someone that wasn't going to go out there and see, some massive role immediately. The thing is, we need to be sending up a prayer that we get good Jordan Love. Jordan Love at the beginning of the season with no weapons looked great. I was like, oh my gosh, I guess the Packers have someone here. Over the past 2 weeks, it has been horrendous. Right now, this is about a pick'em game between the Packers and the Broncos. And ultimately, I think that we can assume that if Jordan Love is going to get right, probably be against the worst defense in the NFL. Now, Zay Flowers will be our next wide receiver. Zay Flowers going up against Detroit, gets there with the receiving touchdown, and Zay Flowers looks great. I mean, wide receiver 25 from a points per game perspective. Clearly, Rashad Bateman, Odell Beckham Jr., not players that we do need to worry about. Surprising to see the Ravens be 3-point favorites. Like I said, I mean, if they are favored, we can assume maybe they run the ball in the second half, similar to what we saw against Tennessee last week, but should be a tougher matchup than what you had with Tennessee. We know against Tennessee, you just play all your wide receivers. We know the secondary can't stop anyone. Now, dropping down to our next tier, I'm going to put Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk back-to-back at 20 and 21. Now, with this being said, ladies and gentlemen, I am making these rankings under the assumption that Trevor Lawrence does not play. He is dealing with the knee sprain. The game's on Thursday, so we're not really going to get that usual timetable recovery from Trevor Lawrence. So if this takes a little bit of time and you end up having Lawrence just taking the week off, coming back the week after, I will be very hesitant to start any Jacksonville Jaguar not named Travis Etienne, or I guess Evan Ingram, just because tight end's disgusting anyway. The wide receivers here, I think we'd have to move down. Now keep in mind, there is a chance that Lawrence plays. And if Lawrence does play, Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk definitely belong somewhere between 14 and 19 in the tier above. Now, Amari Cooper will be our next wide receiver at 22. Amari Cooper, similar boat he finds himself in. And actually, I may move up Amari to the Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk range. Yeah, we're going to put Amari ahead of these guys. With Amari, I'm very much concerned that we are not going to have Deshaun Watson. From the description of this Deshaun Watson shoulder contusion, it sounds like even if Watson were to play, you're most likely going to be in a situation where he is limited. He is unable to push the ball effectively down the field. Now, Amari Cooper was able to get there last week, even with PJ Walker with 0 passing touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Amari still balled out, had a highlight grab, was going nuts as we watched it. But I think we have to assume that we get a small step backwards. Should be a very low scoring game environment, and we don't know who his quarterback is. Chris Godwin will be our next guy. Godwin, keep on saying, okay, he's going to break out. He's going to do something, right? He's getting the consistent target volume. I mean, but he's only the wide receiver 34 from a points per game perspective. Comparison to Mike Evans at wide receiver 17. It's hard to go out there and say that. I mean, I don't know. I do want to say that the targets will bring points. I think that Godwin is a talented player. Now, Jacobe Myers will fall in this same tier, and you can call this tier outside of Chris Godwin. Everybody else is we don't know who their starting quarterback is at this time. If Jimmy Garoppolo is the starting quarterback for Jacobe Myers, we will dramatically move Myers up these rankings. However, with that being said, going up against the Chicago Bears here, probably going to have Brian Hoyer in at quarterback. And at the same time, this is the lowest over-under of any game in the NFL this week. So we probably want to be avoiding these pieces if we can. And I do still stand by Davante Adams being the wide receiver 1 in Las Vegas over Jacobe Myers. Even if Davante Adams this season is the wide receiver 13 from a points per game perspective, and Jacobe Myers is the wide receiver 12. Now, dropping down to our next tier, I know Drake London crushed last week, right? And we just saw the Tampa Bay Buccaneers give up a zillion points to the combination of Amon-Ra St. Brown as well as Jamison Williams. However, with that being said, for Drake London to have a good week last week, we almost needed 50 passing attempts for Desmond Ridder. That's what it took for London to be viable. Right now, you actually have this projecting out to be a very close game, a 2.5 point spread between the Falcons and the Bucs. If the Falcons lead in this game, we know that they're going to run it over and over and over again. And even with London looking great last week, he's still the wide receiver 40 from a points per game perspective. Now, going over to our next guy, we will have Gabe Davis going up against New England. With Gabe Davis, you're open for a touchdown, right? Great offense. Touchdowns will come very, very often. The target volume isn't necessarily there. So from a full PPR perspective, you're not as excited about Gabe Davis. Non-PPR, when we're just chasing touchdowns and yards, then of course we would go through and we would move a Gabe Davis up higher. Terry McLaurin will be our next wide receiver at 27. With McLaurin, a ton of target volume last week, but I'm not buying it. All right. You had nothing for Logan Thomas. You had nothing for John Dotson. While McLaurin definitely looks like he is the wide receiver one here, we've seen that this offense with this coaching staff, they are going to spread the ball out. This is not funnel targets to Terry McLaurin. I mean, that was what we saw last year. That's what we saw the year prior. I don't know. I'm going to have a hard time getting behind McLaurin. And Tyler Lockett will be our next wide receiver. Strong matchup against Arizona. Kind of falls in that same Chris Godwin bucket, right? Where I want to sit here and go, oh, okay, well, he's getting consistent target volume. With the targets will come fantasy points. It's a good matchup against Arizona. It just hasn't really been happening. And also you have Jackson Smith and Jigba waiting in the wings. And JSN is slowly but surely increasing the amount of routes that he is running in this offense. Now, our last two wide receivers will be George Pickens and Deontay Johnson. Y'all know we had George Pickens as that buy low candidate week 1 when he's being valued as a wide receiver 4. However, I don't necessarily think Pickens will be the wide receiver 18 from a points per game perspective rest of season. It's what he's been so far. If you could sell George Pickens as a wide receiver 2, I think that'd make a lot of sense. With Deontay Johnson coming back, with Pat Freiermuth coming back, there will be significantly more mouths to feed in what should be a very bad offense, right? Like, you're not super excited to go out there and start any of these Pittsburgh Steelers options with Kenny Pickett just being no bueno so far this season. But I think that's all we have for this video. If you haven't done so already, please go down there, drop a like, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. And of course, if you want to check out my favorite pick'em, Chris Olave, more than 61.5 receiving yards, or any of those pick'ems over on Underdog Fantasy this week, you can find that link in the description, in the comment section. Promo code FLOCK, you'll get a 100% deposit match, plus our rest of season fantasy football rankings and tiers. And on top of that, ladies and gentlemen, a Trevor Lawrence special pick'em, more than less than half a total yard on Thursday. If Lawrence doesn't play, they'll pivot that to Derek Carr. And we got another special pick'em coming for y'all next week. We'll give you more information about that soon. But thank you again. I really do appreciate you. Really hope you have a great day, and really hope that we get to see you in the live stream later tonight.